Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Andrew Hecht, and this is the final for my Intro to Political Communication class here at Siena College. We are going to be discussing political contributions from major media moguls today. In the wake of the 2020 election, we've seen President-elect Joe Biden win over President Donald Trump, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit about media and its influence on politics and vice versa. So, as we've seen coverage from different media outlets throughout this campaign, and even going back to 2016 when the media was staunchly divided between Republican and Democrat coverage, we've noticed that certain companies and certain outlets have leaned either left or right based off what their viewers expect them to do. So Fox News, obviously since 2016, has been known as the favored news outlet for the president and has staunchly defended the president and his policies and has gone after Democrats in the House and in the Senate who are his opposition regularly every week for the last 4 years. Likewise, the CNN network and MSNBC have gone after the president, have been critics of the president, and have defended his opponents in the House and the Senate. They've also gone after Mitch McConnell and have rallied against the president's policies. We've seen that over the last 4 years. If you remember, in 2016, CNN even garnered the nickname the Clinton News Network as to how biased it seemed to be coming off towards one candidate as opposed to the other. Now, mind you, all national debates are represented on these major news networks. That's ABC News, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and CBS. What most of you may not know, however, is that none of those news channels actually are their own company. They've since either been bought out or always were a subsidiary of larger companies. For example, Fox News belongs to News Corp. Disney owns ABC News and also Vice. National Amusement owns CBS and 60 Minutes. Time Warner owns CNN and Time Magazine. Comcast, which is actually a subsidiary of GE in and of itself, owns NBC, CNBC, and MSNBC. And Viacom, which is the last member of the Big Six, does not have a news outlet, but does own things like Paramount, Nick Jr., BET, and MTV. Now, why is this important? Because the campaign contributions from these parent companies also are great identifiers as to which way these news outlets will lead and which way the political landscape will be formed. And you would think that a company like News Corp, which owns Fox News, would donate to a Republican candidate, considering Fox News is a major proponent of Republican policy and the current president. However, in 2020, according to Open Secrets, now mind you, Open Secrets is an amazing website that will tell you the political campaign contributions of every major corporation because they legally need to be disclosed, and they go and find that information and put it on the internet in a very convenient way for you, the listeners, to find. Now, News Corp owns Fox News. They also own Financial News, the New York Post, which is one of America's oldest newspapers. They own the Wall Street Journal. They own the Dow Jones Newswires, and they are supposedly a conservative company. A lot of their outlets are conservative-leaning or considered highly reputable centrist sources like the Wall Street Journal and the Dow Jones Newswires. But they actually donated $41,500 to campaign contributions this year, and only $18,500 went to Republicans. In fact, $23,000 went to Democrats in the House and the Senate. In the House, people like Representative Clyburn, Dingell, Cicilline, Bass, Demings, Nadler, and Jeffries all received campaign contributions from News Corp, whereas the only Republicans to receive contributions were Armstrong, Buck, Walden, Johnson, and Shubert. Now, in the Senate, News Corp donated to Lindsey Graham, John Kennedy out of Louisiana, and Senator Tillis, but they also donated to Blumenthal out of Connecticut, Shaheen, Peters, Warner, and Senator Durbin. Now, you would wonder, why is a media company playing both sides of the field? Obviously, they want these incumbents to win, And incumbencies allow for more open negotiations, more consistent negotiations. Obviously, a company like News Corp, which is going to be pushing for certain legislation in the federal government as well as local state governments, would like an incumbent to stay an incumbent so that way they know who they're negotiating with and they have a rapport. This is a form of lobbying, direct lobbying. And if you look at News Corp spent more money on Democrats than Republicans despite owning Fox News, despite owning the New York Post. And yet here they are donating to incumbents who are Democratic. This is pretty much the biggest surprise that Open Secrets has in terms of who you would think donate to what. However, what's kind of disturbing is in 2016, Time Warner, which owns CNN and Time Magazine, donated $615,000 to the Clinton campaign, an additional $139,000 to the DCCC, and exactly nothing to Donald Trump, which means that Time Warner, who owns CNN, a network that was labeled to be the Clinton News Network, actually donated almost $1 million to Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DCCC collectively. This shouldn't surprise you. However, what it does show is that it's not necessarily just the market that's dictating the leaning of the network. Sometimes it's the parent company that dictates in which way the news outlet that it controls will lean. Another great example of this is CNBC, MSNBC, and NBC being owned by Comcast, which is, again, a subsidiary of GE. They donated $4.2 million to campaigns in 2020. $2.4 million of that went to Democrats. Only $1.5 went to Republicans. Again, hedging their bets, but they seem to be a lot more in favor of a Democratic-controlled president and a Democratic-controlled House. In fact, it seems to be traditional, according to Open Secrets, that more people are willing to put money in the pockets of representatives in the House for the Democratic Party, but more in the Republicans for the Senate. Disney, which owns ABC News and Vice, donated $2.6 million in the 2020 campaign. $2.5 million went to Democrats. $906,000 of that specifically went to Joe Biden's campaign. $772,000 went to the DCCC. And an additional $144,000 went to Kamala Harris's campaign. Now, again, for those of you who don't know, when you're running for president and vice president, your campaigns are the same campaign. Now, legally, you can vote for a Republican president and a Democrat vice president and vice versa. You are allowed to fill out a ballot that way, but since most political actors as voters vote down ballot or usually will vote one party, that is highly unlikely to happen. This means that Joe Biden's campaign, which was the Biden-Harris campaign, actually got $1.4 million just to itself, although legally it filed as $906,000 to the Biden campaign and $144,000 to Harris's campaign. Meanwhile, Disney only saw fit to donate $93,000 to Donald Trump. And when it comes to campaign funding, and it comes to how much you're able to get done with the resources that you have allotted to you, these PACs, these groups that Disney and NatAm and Time Warner and News Corp are donating to and contributing to, they really are where the money gets brought to fruition for these campaigns to spend. And they're outspending Democrats to Republicans in their own corporations on an average of 3 or 4 to 1. If we look at NatAm, which is CBS and 60 Minutes, they spent $485,000 on Biden and only $16,000 on Trump. That's only in their contributions, let alone the other $2.4 million they spend on contributions to the House and Senate, and an additional $8 million they spent on lobbying. Now, another thing is, when you look at lobbying as opposed to contributions, this is essentially national amusement looking at the direct campaign contributions and saying it's not enough. We're then going to pay a series of lobbyers and lobbyists throughout the year, throughout the last measurements between, I believe, 2018 and 2020. And they're going to continue pressing Congress and the House and the Senate to move legislation or stop legislation that would hurt national amusement. Again, this is the parent company of CBS and 60 Minutes. It's extremely important to know these things, and thank God Open Secrets is a website that allows you to do so. But it's important to know these things because when you're viewing your media market and you're thinking, where is the truth? Where is the most honest news? Is there an inherent bias or an intrinsic bias? The answer is there always will be. As long as there's a corporation out there, there's a corporation willing to contribute and spend money on politics that controls your media, it's always going to have an intrinsic bias, an inherent bias, because there's no way that a company like Time Warner, who owns CNN, can spend almost $1 million in 2016 supporting Hillary Clinton. There's no way that anything related to their company can have an unbiased opinion on politics. And that's what they saw. It was apparent that CNN was in favor of Hillary Clinton. However, if you look at Rupert Murdoch's owned News Corp and Fox News, you would think that they would pay more to see Republicans stay in Congress, in the Senate and in the House, but they don't. They still vote with their money to contribute to Democratic campaigns. Now, that might be the most evidence-based argument for a media market not directly responding to the owner of the media company. However, by and large, it seems that where the money goes that these media moguls spend on contributions, that is also who they support in the market. As a viewer of news, you should find that disturbing. It's the mediality, or the reality that media perpetuates into your life, is surrounded by the stories they choose to cover, by how they choose to frame those stories, by what topics they choose are most important, and what topics they want to save for later in the show when listeners have either tuned out or have tuned in without seeing the beginning part of the show. So the shorter segments are always at the end of the show. They get to choose all those things. They get to form the reality that you buy into through viewership, the opinions that you will form through listening continually to one source. And they've already decided it for you. They've already decided with their money to help advance a political agenda and a political group. In this instance, it happens to be the Biden campaign and the Democratic Party. They've already chosen to help bring that presidency to fruition, and then they're going to sell you their own personal version of reality that would enforce you to want to vote for that group of people, the Democratic Party, and therefore the Biden presidency. And this is all happening without you ever realizing it. So if there's one thing I learned in my Intro to Political Communication class, and there's one thing that I think is most important for the listeners of this podcast and for listeners of any media market, it is important that you do your research as to where the media company thinks that it wants to go with its agenda and to where it puts its money before you subscribe to the idea that the market dictates specifically what they're going to put out. Because everyone's going to cover the story about a school shooting or about taxes or about a natural disaster. But the mediality aspect, how they spin it, how they choose to politicize it, is going to be based off who they really want to see elected in Congress and at the presidency. And that should be evident, especially in this election, that even Fox News right now is in hot water with the president for being considered sellouts. Laura Ingraham just had to address her fan base saying Donald Trump lost the election. Laura Ingraham was a staunch supporter of Donald Trump. Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, who were staunch supporters of the president, have also had to do similar things and admit on air that the election goes to Joe Biden. And it seems like they are reluctant to do it. And if you look at all the numbers that I've listed tonight, it would probably be because the media company and its owner seem to be on two different pages when it comes to where the money's going and what message is being put out. However, if you look at Dow Jones Newswires, which is their print subsidiary, as well as the Wall Street Journal, which also comes from Dow Jones, those seem to be more level-headed, neutral sources, highly credible sources that have consistently been relied on both in academia and in professional settings. They have long since called the election in favor of President-elect Joe Biden. However, if you look at, again, Time Warner, which owns CNN, MSNBC, if you look at Viacom, which has no actual news outlet, they tend to spend more on Democratic nominees and candidates. Viacom in the House, 65% of their political contributions went to Democrats. However, Viacom's Senate contributions, 89% went to Republicans. And that's got to do with lobbying and who you can negotiate with. Again, incumbencies. And those are important. But so is the message that these companies send out to viewers, to the average American, to future voters, potential voters. This is the concept I keep referring to as mediality. This is what is important. You have to understand that media will always have a bias, and it goes all the way back up to the top of the company. So next time you turn on Fox News, next time you turn on CNN, next time you turn on MSNBC, just think to yourself, is what I'm hearing completely true? Or is what I'm hearing geared towards making me want to believe that one group or one person is better than another group or another person, especially when you're looking at a voting cycle, an election season? So that's every 2 years for Congress. That's for the House. That's every 6 years for the Senate. That's every 4 years for president. And in state and local elections, they also vary. And that's my piece on mediality and the relationship between campaign contributions and the media moguls that own the media companies that we subscribe to on cable. Thank you for giving me your time,